Barry Gibb, the last surviving Bee Gee, the voice that defined an era. The man whose falsetto once ruled the airwaves, igniting dance floors across the globe, and whose songwriting brilliance shaped the soundtrack of an entire generation. But behind the disco anthems, the flashing lights, and the iconic harmonies lies a story soaked in unimaginable grief, crushing loneliness, and a slow-burning sorrow that fame could never cure. Because now, at 80 years old, Barry Gibb stands alone, surrounded by echoes of voices that once harmonized beside him, ghosts of brothers who died far too soon, and the brutal weight of being the last man standing. To the world, he's a legend. But to those who truly understand his story, he's a man who has endured more loss than any heart should bear. He didn't just lose his brothers, he lost his band, his identity, his best friends. The Bee Gees weren't just music, they were blood. And now that bloodline has faded, leaving Barry to carry both the legacy and the pain. For every standing ovation he receives, there's an empty chair backstage where a brother should be. For every award, there's a memory of a laugh or a fight or a song that will never be sung again. This is not the story of a rock star. This is the story of a man who watched his world vanish, piece by piece. A man whose silence speaks louder than his songs. Because at 80, the tragedy of Barry Gibb is beyond heartbreaking. And once you understand the depths of his loss, you'll never hear a Bee Gees song the same way again. For Barry Gibb, the applause never truly drowned out the silence that followed. The kind of silence only someone who has lost everything can understand. Long before he was a music icon, before the Bee Gees became a cultural phenomenon, Barry was just the eldest of 4 brothers chasing a dream with nothing but raw talent and an unbreakable bond. That bond became their superpower. Barry, Maurice, Robin, and later Andy weren't just family. They were soulmates in harmony, voices entwined in ways that could only come from shared blood and shared pain. They rose together, fell together, reinvented themselves together. But as the years passed, that unity was torn apart, not by fame, but by fate. Maurice died first in 2003, a sudden heart attack during what should have been a routine surgery. Barry was devastated. He said it felt like losing a part of his own body, because in many ways it was. Maurice had been the glue, the joker, the peacemaker. Without him, everything changed. And then, in 2012, Robin died after a long and public battle with cancer. Barry didn't just lose another brother. He lost his twin in music, the other half of the Bee Gees' iconic sound. But perhaps the most haunting loss of all came decades earlier, in 1988, when their youngest brother, Andy, died at just 30 years old from heart failure following years of substance abuse. Barry had tried desperately to save him. He begged him to get help, offered him opportunities, brought him into the fold, but it wasn't enough. He's admitted that guilt still follows him every single day. 3 brothers, all gone, and Barry remains, left to carry their memories, their legacy, and their songs alone. The stage, once filled with laughter and teasing glances between siblings, is now a lonely place. The harmonies he once crafted with family now echo back at him in solitude. And though the world still cheers, he admits that sometimes he feels like a ghost, performing not for the present, but for the past. Interviews with Barry in recent years have revealed the deep, lingering grief he carries. His voice cracks when speaking of Maurice's mischievous grin, or Robin's intense passion for their art. And when he talks about Andy, his eyes often fill with tears, a painful reminder of the baby brother he couldn't protect. What makes Barry's story so quietly devastating is the way he continues to endure. He doesn't crumble. He doesn't disappear.
He performs.
He writes, he honors. But each act is soaked in melancholy. Being the last Gibb is a kind of cruel punishment, the price of longevity when everyone else is gone. At 80, Barry Gibb has all the accolades a musician could dream of. Grammys, Hall of Fame inductions, global recognition. But what he doesn't have, and can never get back, is the sound of his brothers' voices beside him. That loss has become his shadow, one that stretches longer with each passing year. And in every interview, every tribute concert, every bittersweet rendition of How Deep Is Your Love or To Love Somebody, the heartbreak sits quietly behind his smile. Because this is no longer just a story of music. It's the story of survival, of a man haunted by harmony. carrying the unbearable burden of outliving everyone he loved. Fame, for Barry Gibb, was never just a dream fulfilled. It was a double-edged sword that often cut the deepest where it mattered most, within his own family. As the Bee Gees rose to unprecedented heights in the late 70s, becoming the face and sound of the disco era with chart-topping hits like Stayin' Alive and Night Fever, the world saw three glamorous brothers drenched in glitter, lights, and success. But behind the sequins and studio magic were growing tensions, private heartbreaks, and the slow unraveling of something sacred. Barry, the eldest and most driven, often found himself in the uncomfortable role of de facto leader, making decisions, directing the musical vision, and taking responsibility when things went wrong. It built a distance between him and his brothers, especially Robin, whose strong creative instincts sometimes clashed with Barry's direction. They were brothers, yes, but also bandmates, businessmen, and rivals, and that complex relationship often spilled over into arguments and cold silences that lasted for months. Their internal conflicts were never about love. They were about pressure. The relentless grind of fame, the expectation to keep delivering hits, the suffocating identity of being the Bee Gees, with no room for personal space or healing. And then came the backlash. In the early 1980s, the Bee Gees went from being pop royalty to punchlines almost overnight, as disco fell out of favor. Radio stations banned their music. DJs refused to play their records. The same crowds that once screamed their names now dismissed them as relics of a fading trend. Barry, who had poured his soul into their sound, was crushed. He once admitted that the rejection felt deeply personal, not just a blow to their careers, but to their dignity. And while the group quietly shifted focus to writing hits for other artists, Dionne Warwick, Barbra Streisand, Diana Ross, the damage had already been done. The emotional toll led to silence between the brothers at times. There were years when they barely spoke. The camaraderie, once effortless, had been strained by years of compromise, exhaustion, and grief. And then Andy's death in 1988 shattered what little unity remained. Barry never fully recovered from that. In fact, many say he was never the same. He'd blamed himself for encouraging Andy into the business, for not seeing the warning signs of his spiral soon enough. And that guilt crept into everything, his music, his voice, his eyes. By the time Morris died in 2003, Barry's inner circle had grown smaller, more guarded. He stopped trusting easily. He avoided interviews. He spoke through lyrics, not through conversation. When Robin died in 2012, it felt like the end of the Bee Gees. But more than that, the end of Barry's foundation. He was the last man standing, surrounded by ghosts that no award or tribute could chase away. Fame had made them legends, but it had also left him utterly, achingly alone. And now, at 80, Barry often speaks with a heaviness in his tone, grateful for the success, but forever burdened by what it cost. The music remains, yes, but the voices are gone. The harmony is gone. And every time he performs a Bee Gees song today, he's not just singing to an audience. He's singing to the past, to three brothers frozen in time, and to a version of himself that no longer exists. There's something almost cruel in how music, the very thing that made Barry Gibb a legend, is also what keeps him tethered to his grief. Every melody, every falsetto, every echo of the harmonies he once shared with his brothers now acts as a ghostly reminder of a time that can never return. Even in his quietest moments, the songs linger. They play in his mind, in the stillness of his home, in the lonely spaces between memories. While the world sings along to How Deep Is Your Love words or To Love Somebody, Barry hears the voices that are missing, the rich blend of Morris's grounding tones, Robin's sharp emotional edge, Andy's youthful passion, and that's the tragedy that fans often miss. For Barry, every note is both a celebration and a wound. After losing all three of his brothers, music became both a sanctuary and a burden. He couldn't walk away from it. It was in his blood, his bones, but performing without them felt like speaking a language that no one else understood anymore. And while the world has honored the Bee Gees with awards, documentaries, and tribute concerts, Barry has admitted that the attention often feels hollow. What's the point of success if there's no one left to share it with? He once asked in a rare, raw interview. The spotlight that once felt warm now feels cold. He smiles, but it doesn't always reach his eyes. He performs, but often in a subdued tone, as if every lyric is a whisper to the past. His voice, still powerful, carries an ache that never fades, a kind of emotional scar tissue that no vocal coach could ever fix. Even his later collaborations, including his deeply personal solo album Greenfields, feel like elegies, tributes not to a band, but to a family buried in the music. In interviews, he's confessed that he often dreams of his brothers, especially Andy, who died so young. Those dreams are vivid, emotional, and cruelly fleeting. Waking up from them is like losing them all over again. And as Barry ages, the weight of those losses grows heavier. His body has slowed, he walks more carefully now, his posture more stooped, his performances shorter. The man who once danced under dazzling lights now prefers the quiet of his garden, the comfort of his wife Linda, and the rare joy of being with his children and grandchildren. But even in those peaceful moments, the silence sings. Because it's not just the voices of his brothers that are gone. It's the laughter, the arguments, the inside jokes, the decades of shared history that no one else can ever replicate. Barry Gibb has become a man who exists between two worlds, one filled with the memories of a past so vibrant it's painful, and one that continues to move forward without the people who helped him build it. And that's the cruel irony of legacy. While it ensures the world never forgets the Bee Gees, it forces Barry to remember them every single day. Not as legends, not as icons, but as brothers, as boys with dreams and guitars, lost in a harmony that only they could ever create. Now, at 80 years old, Barry Gibb moves through life as both a legend and a living memorial, a man who walks through the present, forever tethered to the past. He has the love of his longtime wife, Linda, and the presence of his children and grandchildren. Yet even in the comfort of family, the absence of his brothers hovers like a shadow that never quite fades. He is a man surrounded by legacy, but often starved for the simplicity of what once was. 4 boys in a tiny flat, writing songs not for fame, but for the sheer joy of making music together. The world sees Barry Gibb as a music titan, the last Bee Gee, the survivor, the genius. But few understand the quiet torment that comes with outliving everyone who knew the beginning of your story. There are no more late-night calls from Maurice to share a laugh. No more creative battles with Robin over lyrics and melody. No more anxious attempts to save Andy from the edge. He is the last witness to a golden era that ended far too soon, and the weight of remembering it alone has aged him more than time ever could. In interviews, you can see it, the way he pauses before speaking about them, as if pulling memories out of a place too sacred for casual mention. He doesn't cry often in public, but when he does, it's with the deep sobs of a man who has cried alone for years. And though he still takes the stage on rare occasions, each performance feels like a quiet farewell. One more chance to sing the words that once belonged to 4 voices, now resting in just one. Even as his health declines, his hair turns silver, and his once vibrant presence softens, Barry remains committed to honoring what they built together. But he knows more than anyone that legacy is not a substitute for presence. The halls of his home are lined with gold records, photos, awards, symbols of achievement that mean little when the people who helped earn them are no longer here to share in the moment. And so he retreats into simpler things, the quiet of the countryside, the sound of birds in the morning, the feel of a guitar in his hands. He says he still writes songs, though not as often. And when he does, he sometimes forgets he's writing alone. He still hears Maurice's harmonies in his head, still feels Robin's input echo through the melodies, still imagines Andy bursting in with a smile. But then he looks up and remembers. The room is silent. The harmonies live only in memory, and Barry Gibb, the eldest of the brothers, is once again the only one left to carry them forward. His tragedy is not in how they died, but in how he must continue living. And that is perhaps the most heartbreaking truth of all. Because for Barry Gibb, the music never really stopped. It just became a haunting echo of everything and everyone he's lost.